What is folklore? Folklore is what you believe. People seem to think that folklore died out in the 19th century, but it's still all around us. How many of you actually know your star sign? A lot of people still look at their horoscopes. Nobody believes it, of course, but we still look, don't we? Again, homeopathy. A lot of people believe that homeopathy works. A lot of people don't. Again, the Exmoor beast. Is that real or is it imagined? Is it a sort of folklore belief? Witchcraft. Everyone knows about witches. In Devon, men were called witches as well as women. And if you weren't a witch, you were quite often called a cunning person. And very often, these cunning people would be your first port of call if you were ill. Because they had some medical knowledge, they knew about herbs. But they did other things as well. If you lost property, they would help you find it. If you were overlooked, that meant you were bewitched. Then you would go to a good witch, i.e. a white witch, not a black witch, to get the curse lifted. And every village and town had these people. Certainly here in Bideford we had the three famous witches, the last people to be hanged in England for the crime of witchcraft in the 17th century. But all the way through the 18th, the 19th and even into the 20th century there are references to witches here in Bideford and all over North Devon. In fact, where you are now in the Burton, you're only about 250 yards from when the last working witch actually plied her trade in Victoria Park back in the 1930s. It is that close to us, and of course today there are still some people claim to be witches. One of the odder aspects of folklore is something called Lenten shards. Now shards are pieces of broken pottery. And Lenten shards was a sort of village ceremony that took place on the evening of Shrove Tuesday every year. For 2 weeks before this, the young men of the village or the town would gather up all the broken pottery they could lay their hands on. And on the evening of Shrove Tuesday, they would go to the house of the most unpopular and disliked person in the settlement. And they would then hurl their pottery shards at the door of that person. And this could go on for 2 hours or more. It occurred in many villages across North Devon. And there are many, many references to people being arrested for doing this. But very often the fines that were levied on them were very small. Now this seems very cruel to us today. Firstly, having your property damaged, but secondly, finding out that you were the most disliked person in the village. In the days when villages were very self-contained and everybody knew everybody else. Wouldn't that be a terrible fate to find your door the target for the Lenten shards and you the most disliked person in the village? It is a well-known fact that mayors are always fairly pompous people. Here in Bideford and in many other settlements in North Devon, the people elected what they called a mock mayor. This was a spoof on the real mayor. It was designed to bring him down to earth. Here in Bideford in the 19th century, there are many references to the election of a mock mayor. Very often these people would be a shipwright working in the Bideford shipyards, and they would be given a badge of office and sometimes a cloak to wear, and they would then take their place in the mayoral coach. It wasn't quite a coach, it was actually a wheelbarrow, and they were wheeled by their mates who were probably killing themselves laughing. They were wheeled around all the pubs in the town. At each pub the mayor would get out, he would make a speech condemning taxes on beer and income tax in general, to huge cheers from the audience. They would then have a drink at every pub. You can imagine what it must have been like by the end of the tour. They were legless. They needed the wheelbarrow. Mock mares still go on today. Famously, one of the last mares here in Bideford was for Easter Water. And it was David Fulford, who was actually a councillor. David wore his robes, he wore his badge of office, but he isn't the only one. And this ceremony of electing a mock mayor still continues today. In the past, if you were unhappily married, what could you do? Divorce was impossible. It didn't come in until 1857. Before that time, you had two options. You could either run away and perhaps get married again bigamously, but people were jailed for bigamy, so you were taking a chance there. The other option was you could get a private Act of Parliament. This didn't allow you to actually be divorced, it just separated you from your spouse. Private Acts of Parliament were so expensive that they were out of the league of most people. There was, however, one other thing you could do. If you were a man, you could sell your wife. That sounds pretty incredible to us, but it happened. And it happened on at least 3 occasions here in North Devon. And it followed a fairly recognised routine, where the man would take his wife to the market, the local market. He would then put her up on the auction block, and he'd put a horse's halter around her neck. He would then call for bids, and whoever bid the most would instantly, when the hammer was brought down, be married to her, and he would be divorced. This was never legal, but it was seen as folklore, L-A-W. As I say, there are 3 examples in North Devon, and if you are interested, the going price for a wife was 5 shillings or 25p. Quite a bargain. One of the aspects of folklore that still exists today are calendar customs. We have a lot of them even today. Go to Torrington for May Day, huge celebration. We have Mother's Day, we have Father's Day, we have, if you believe the card shops, we celebrate the Jewish New Year, the Chinese New Year, Diwali, and all the other new calendar customs that have come in multicultural Britain. One of the oldest of the customs was bonfire night, November the 5th. Before that time, in the past, boys and girls would make a guy and they would parade it around the streets collecting pennies that they could then use to buy fireworks. That doesn't seem to happen today, as it's been replaced by the American import of Halloween. But in our villages and towns of North Devon in the past, November the 5th was very often a huge celebration. And here in Bideford, it was marked by a slightly unsafe celebration. People would stand at the top of High Street with tar barrels, old barrels coated in tar. They would then set fire to them and roll them down the High Street. Which sounds pretty impressive, and I suspect it was very spectacular. But you have to remember, back in those days, many houses had thatched roofs and were made of wood. And you can see the problems that might cause. The police tried to stop it, but it was very difficult because people liked their burning tar barrels. As I say, now we have Halloween, which upsets some people, probably in the way burning tar barrels upset some of our ancestors.